Hello everyone, Kami here, and the Muppets are back with a brand new special. From what I understand, this is acting like a pilot for a potentially brand new Muppet Show series, and that honestly sounds pretty cool. From what I saw here, this seems like a good first episode back, and just a good special in general, honestly. I do have a bit of a problem with it, and I'm not sure if it's just me, but I don't feel too much towards this special. I'm assuming it's just a me thing because I've never been that big of a fan of the Muppets throughout my life, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that there wasn't really that much Muppets content as I was growing up, and when you combine that with the fact that we didn't have any VHS tapes or DVDs from them either, I guess I never got to grow attached to them in any sort of way. But even then, I think this special should have transcended that, and it kind of didn't, so let's dive into it and see why. But first, leave a like and a comment telling me what you thought about this special. Also, it's worth noting here that I think it's well made. Okay, first things first, I have to talk about Matt Vogel's Kermit, and I think I've nailed down why I don't like it, so I'm gonna break this down into two parts, with the first being pitch. Okay, so in my opinion, Kermit's voice lands nicely in that middle high range, where it's lower than Mickey but higher than Pete, and I think the problem with Matt is that he ends up dipping a bit too low at times with his Kermit voice and ends up sounding less like Kermit as a result of that lower pitch, which just throws people off because it sounds like Kermit but it's not quite there in terms of pitch. The second reason is with how nasally his voice is. While I do think that Kermit's voice does have a fair amount of nasal to it, I think that Matt's performance ends up having too much nasal a fair amount of the time and ends up further messing up the voice for people. And honestly, with all things considered, his vocal performance is at its best here compared to some of his earlier performances, though it's still got some work that needs to be done on it. Aside from that big thing, I honestly think he's got the physical performance of Kermit down really well, so that's good. And next off, I don't think this special is particularly funny. A lot of the comedy either didn't land for me or only got a very small chuckle out of me, and I'm not sure if it's just because the humor of the Muppets isn't really my style of humor or if it's just genuinely not that funny. I can admit the jokes do have proper setup and payoff, and no joke does the punchline incorrectly or anything like that, but none of the jokes particularly stand out to me either, perhaps because of the mere predictability of a fair amount of the jokes here. Either way, the comedy isn't super strong here, and I'm not exactly sure why that is, but it definitely does contribute to my overall meh feeling towards this special, as every attempt at humor doesn't really get me here. The canned laughter does not help, and in fact probably made a fair amount of the humor worse to me. While I'm here, the plot doesn't seem all too important to this special either. While the original Muppet Show didn't have a focus on a plot line, if you're going to make this special have one, I'd like to see a little more focus on it. As is, it feels like it got lost in the sauce and only ended up getting a few scenes dedicated to it, and at that point it would have been easier to just cut entirely. If they did want to do the storyline still, I think they would have had to dedicate more time to the special in general to make room for it in the special. Next up, the music. None of the songs are bad here, so that's good. However, a fair amount of them do have that classic case of obvious tuning in them, and I know most of you don't care, but as someone who has a musical ear, it really bothers me, especially due to the fact that it takes away from the aspect of the show pretending like it's being performed in real time right in front of you in favor of making the notes being hit perfectly. And if you're curious, yes, I do think that it's important to consider that aspect of production before you go in to artificially change the note, as that has major repercussions on your project, especially if you're trying to make it seem like it's being done in real time. The TLDR of that section is that it ruined the immersion whenever I heard some obvious tuning tuning on vocals in this special. And to talk a little bit more broadly for this last part, pretty much all the stuff featuring Sabrina Carpenter felt very wooden, either due to her acting or due to the way other characters acted around her, contributing to my least favorite scenes of this special. The man-child segment was the comedy didn't really get me, and the song felt too generic for me to care about the performance. In fact, this kind of criticism holds for pretty much every other segment for me, where nothing is that great, but nothing is too terrible for me to really talk about them that extensively. I did come into this pretty optimistic, but by the end, I didn't have any kind of strong feelings on this special, and I think that means it's like a 4 out of 10 for me, which is really strange for me to say because I honestly thought I would have enjoyed this a lot more than I did. And I suppose it's a bit anticlimactic for me to end this off on a 4 out of 10 rating, but what can you do? The pure mediocrity stood out to me a lot more than the good aspects did, which is really upsetting to me because I do think there's aspects of this special to enjoy. However, they're mostly buried under more of the mediocre aspects, and that makes up for a really middling experience for me personally. Also, I feel the need to express that this is just my opinion. You may find a lot more enjoyment out of this than I did, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's great. Anyways, with all that being said, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. Later! Wasting time.